Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going. So I like to point out each and every day, it expands our base. First of all, I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving. That, to me, is one of the most special moments in our history. It is a moment when, theoretically, we come together to celebrate America. That's right. And so I want today to address several things. I hope that what I'm going to say now will be of interest to all of you. Let's begin with the shootings in Washington, D.C. Let's first of all point out that there is a question now in the courts about whether having the National Guard in Washington, D.C. is legal. That's right. But we know that everything in terms of this legal debate was completely overcome with the shooting and death of Sarah Backstrom, who was shot and killed by an Afghan national who came to this country, and the recovery, we pray, of Sergeant Andrew Wolf, who is still in the hospital as of this recording in critical condition. First of all, I want you to know that none of this would have happened if the National Guard were not in Washington, D.C. And the question of whether the troops being in Washington is legal is an issue now before the courts. Of course, everything is changed by the shooting of these two National Guard members and the death of one. It changes everything. And all you have to do is listen to the rhetoric being employed. And that's what I really want to address, the question of rhetoric. I was stunned over the weekend to hear Republicans parroting what the White House was saying, that the fault was Joe Biden's. That's right. The shooting was attributed to Joe Biden. And I thought to myself, are they nuts? What are they thinking? And I want to address this very directly. First of all, it's true that this arrangement to bring Afghanis who fought with American troops to the United States was initiated under Joe Biden. But it is also true that this Afghan national who committed this horrific crime was cleared by the Trump administration. And so what I want to do is to step back and point out that the death of these individuals, or at least the death of one, and perhaps, we hope not, but perhaps the death of another, is not the fault of Joe Biden and not the fault of Donald Trump. Because this shooter was collaborating with the CIA in Afghanistan. What we know is he had exemplary respect from the people with whom he worked, that he was admitted to this country because he helped this country during the Afghan war, and now, because something snapped, somebody told me this morning, well, he suffered from paranoia. Whatever he suffered from, it was a combined decision to open the doors of this country to those in Afghanistan who helped America. And whether it was Joe Biden's policy, which initiated this, or Donald Trump's administration, which approved this particular admission, the simple truth is you can't control what people do, even if you screen them. And there is no question that in the case of this shooter, there was absolutely no evidence that he was in any way a danger. In fact, he was a friend. He had worked with the United States. So I wanted to raise this question because what happened is that the Republicans, in a reflex reaction initiated by Donald Trump's administration, chose to blame a former president of the United States, Joe Biden, for the shooting of these two individuals, the death of one, of course. And the simple fact is, Joe Biden didn't do anything wrong. Neither did Donald Trump. Both acted believing that this Afghan national who worked with the CIA in Afghanistan immigrated to the United States in 2021. Well, he was somebody who you couldn't control. The suspect had worked in a special CIA-backed Afghan army unit before immigrating from Afghanistan, and there was no doubt that he had earned the right to come here. Now, Judge Pirro, the U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia, declined to provide a motive for Wednesday afternoon's act. And of course, how could she know? The shooter is absolutely silent. He doesn't want to cooperate. But we know that the presence of troops in our nation's capital and other cities around the country has become a political flashpoint. And we know that it is controversial. Judge Pirro identified the Guard members at a news conference. She was very clear about these being great Americans. But do you understand the rare shooting of National Guard members on American soil on the eve of Thanksgiving? It's happening when there are court fights over whether or not the Trump administration policy for the use of military to combat what officials cast as an out-of-control crime problem is legitimate. And it's in court. And it's being debated. And on top of that, you have the FBI director, Kash Patel, who said the shooting is being investigated as an act of terrorism. Of course it was an act of terrorism. No question about it. And you should know that agents have served a series of search warrants with Patel calling it a coast-to-coast investigation. The reason? Because the shooter lived on the West Coast. This is a real problem because of the hysteria that it has caused. And I want to emphasize that. It is hysteria, and that is what bothers me. Is the National Guard presence in Washington, D.C., or anywhere else in this great country legal? That's the question. And there is no doubt that Donald Trump launched the deployment on August the 8th when he declared a public safety emergency and said his administration would be, dealing with this problem, and yes, as an aside, removing homeless encampments. He said he aimed to reduce crime. The Attorney General of Washington, D.C., said violent crime in the district reached a 30-year low prior to Donald Trump taking any action. Now, one of the things that we need to understand is that this is a great debate in the United States over whether or not National Guard should be deployed in major American cities. Do you understand that this argument is going to be debated in the court? On November 20th, a federal judge ordered the Trump administration to end the deployment, saying it illegally intruded on local officials' authority to direct law enforcement. This issue needs to be aired in the courts. And the emotion, the tragedy that has taken place now in Washington, D.C., needs to be put in a context that is clear. But what bothered me about all this was the decision by the Trump administration and the Republicans to blame Joe Biden. Well, let me ask you a question. If, in fact, this shooter was cleared under the Trump administration, do you blame Donald Trump? Of course not. This is not a matter of blame. This is a matter of accepting responsibility. And the simple truth is that the responsibility to work with our allies in Afghanistan, to save them from persecution by the Taliban, perhaps death by the Taliban, was an obligation we undertook with our allies. Let me remind everyone, particularly those of you who live in Southern California, we did the same thing for Vietnamese, who were our allies until the end of that war. That most of the Vietnamese who came during that period of 1975, 76, 77 have proven to be good citizens, important assets to this country. And I would suggest that many of the Taliban victims, those from Afghanistan who fled because they worked with us and were afraid of Taliban retribution, that many of them are good citizens, that what we have seen in the last few days is an exception, not a rule. I want to deal with another question, and I do this morning with great care. There is a book which I read over the holiday. It is called A Man and His Presidents, the story of William F. Buckley, the leading conservative thinker for generations in this country. The book is written by Alvin Felsenberg. I had a chance to talk to Al the other day because he's considering writing a biography of Barry Goldwater. And we had a long and I would say productive chat about it. But while reading this book, I came across a paragraph, and I want to share it with you, and I'd love to get your feedback. It has to do with abuse of power by a president of the United States. Buckley's ire was most aroused when a memorandum White House counsel John Dean had written to Deputy Chief of Staff John Ehrlichman became public. Entitled Maximizing the Incumbency, Dean's memo recommended that the administration make full use of its incumbent powers to screw its political enemies. Buckley deemed the document an act of proto-fascism, proclaiming it altogether ruthless as it dismissed at its dismissal of human rights. And he continued, it is fascist in its reliance on the state as the instrument of harassment. It is fascist in its automatic assumption that the state in all matters comes before the individual, and it is fascist in tone, the stealth, the brutality, the self-righteousness. Let me tell you, when I read this, I immediately thought of Donald Trump and where we are today. Many of you know I have declined over the years to ever use the term communist when it was applied to Barack Obama, or fascist when it was applied to Donald Trump. I don't think name-calling works at all. But history teaches us a lesson. And the lesson taught to us by William F. Buckley Jr. is that if it quacks like a duck, waddles like a duck, looks like a duck, it's a duck. And Donald Trump's administration has proven to us that the abuse of power is clear and present. Why do I, on this Thanksgiving weekend, choose to deal with this subject in this way? Because when I listen to Republicans accusing the Joe Biden and his administration of being responsible for the death of one National Guardsman and the serious injury of another, it occurred to me that that is the misuse of power. And that's really what bothered me. And so I wanted to quote William F. Buckley Jr. He certainly is a creditable source. And abuse of power, whether under a Democrat or a Republican, needs to be exposed and condemned. I want you to think seriously about what Buckley has said, and I want you to apply it not to then. I want you to apply it to now. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. I really would. You can write me a review on Apple Podcasts, drop a comment on YouTube or Spotify, and click any of the links in the show notes to connect with me on social media. Remember, please, to share this episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand. Well, we've got the weekend ahead. I won't be back until Monday. This show has been getting so much positive attention that we're excited to bring in advertising support. This will help us create more opportunities for Around the Political World with John Rothman. So the commercials at the beginning and at the end of this podcast are, I hope, an inducement to you to spread the word, because more and more people are tuning in to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I want to say a special thank you to Gogo Zoger. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving, Gogo, and a great day off yesterday. We will be back, Gogo and I, and you, I hope, on Monday as we continue our adventure Around the Political World with John Rothman. Have a great weekend. See you then.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.